Hey there, Stampers. It's Jennifer McGuire here. Today I have a fun technique for you with a terrible name because I couldn't think of anything better. I asked my husband, he said squeegee stamping. I don't know. Anyways, I'm just going to call it swipe stamping. And it's got really fun results, and I used it on the card here. It gives like these stamped images with these lines in it. And I just think it's fun and different. Now, it's funny how I came up with this. I was telling Colin about this one time I was watching TV and I saw a celebrity who likes to do crafting. I'm not going to say who it was, but she was showing how to ink a stamp, and she did it completely wrong. She did not ink a stamp how stampers ink a stamp. So clearly she's not a stamper, but that's okay. But she did this way of inking, and when I was showing Colin what this celebrity was doing, I noticed that the results are pretty cool. They're not as intended, but it gives some fun results, and it's just something different that you can do, just a fun different technique. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do it. I'm using a new stamp set from the Simon Says Stamp September card kit. You can also buy the stamp set separately, but the kit is fantastic. And I'm going to use some of the flowers in this. This technique would actually probably work better with bigger images because you could really see the difference, but I liked it with these little flowers too. I'm using Hero Art Shadow Inks, and here you can see how us normal stampers stamp. We ink up the stamp by dabbing and then stamping it onto the paper. But here is what you can do to get a different result. You just swipe it across the ink pad. Now you can experiment about how much pressure. I used a good amount of pressure to do this, but you get like these streaks along the stamped image, and I think it's kind of cool. It's much softer, and you just want to kind of play around with it. Now I also tried it with a pigment ink to see how it worked. So here, let's go ahead and stamp this great Luxe ink with just solid, how we normally do. Now here it is with swipe stamping, where you just kind of swipe it across the ink pad. Again, depending on what ink you have, give it some practice so you can see how much pressure you need. That's what I'm kind of doing here, and you can get different results. So it's really quite fun. I think I like it a little bit better with the dye ink, but you can use whatever ink that you may have. So I'm going to use the Hero Art Shadow Inks because I like that. Now here I've kind of stamped out a pattern. I was just playing around with how I wanted to cluster my stamps together. So that's what this is. So I'm going to be kind of following this as a guide. I always like to practice my stamping if I'm going to do a bunch of little images like this together. I also have just a plain white 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of white cardstock here, but I could always trim this down if I change my mind. So I'm starting out with bubblegum ink, and I did some swiping as I inked it. And there's my first flower. I really think it's fun, those little streaks that you get in it. Maybe I could have called it streak stamping. That doesn't sound good either. Really, there's no good name here. So anyways, next I'm moving on to Fresh Peach. Just swiping right across that ink pad. I'm going to rotate a little bit here and go ahead and stamp this again. Again, I'm trying to follow that key that I have there, that messy little key, but you can wing it if you want to. I'm not good at winging it, really. So next I have Butter Bar. I'm going to swipe that down with this smaller stamp. You can see the swiping here. Sometimes I just press it down a few times and then I swipe it across right at the end, just so I can make sure I have lots of ink on it. So I'm going to tap it on there a few times and then swipe it across. I don't think you really need to swipe it more than once, but for some reason I do. And I'll just stamp that onto the paper. So you get a much softer color than you would if you just stamped it regular. Now this is Eclipse masking paper. It's just a sticky paper that's great for masking. So I'm just stamping the flowers onto here so I can create some masks. If you don't have this sticky paper, you could just use a Post-it note or regular typing paper and just add it with a little bit of temporary adhesive. So I'm just going to cut these out. I'll kind of do this quick and dirty. I don't think you really need to cut out your masks perfectly. So now it's time to use those masks to create the leaves without overlapping over the flowers we already stamped. So I'm peeling off the back, and I've got these little masks. Now I'm going to keep these masks, and I'll stick those to my stamp set and keep them in my storage so that whenever I want to use a stamp set again and I need masking, I already have the masks created. It's great to keep those. So I'll just put one over the flower here. I just cover up the flowers as I go. I don't need to cover them up all at once. And then I'm going to take some of the leaves. One of the things I like about the stamp set, it's one of those building stamp sets where you kind of build up images. So you can layer, there's some centers that you can use, there's some berries that you can use with stems, so you can really layer them up, and I'll show some of that in a bit. So I'm also using swiping on this. I've discovered that it looks better if you do all the images with the swiping, because if you stamp some regular, they're a lot more intense than the swiped images, and they just kind of stick out. So you can play around with it and see what works for you, but for me, I found by doing all the images with the swiping, you get a nice, I guess, uniform look. So I'm just going through and adding lots of leaves here and there. Really no science to this. I just kind of want to get a nice little flow going up and over on the card. Now here's the fun little stem here. It's got these 3 little ends and then the berry image that goes with it. This is what I'm talking about, these stamp sets where you kind of build up images. I've used them in the past before and I love seeing more and more of them come out. But I like this one because you stamp this little stem here. And then we're going to go back with the little berry image and stamp little berries that perfectly match up with those 3 little ends on the stem. So I'm using soft pool ink here, swiping across. Now this is a teeny tiny image, so swiping really doesn't show up here. So sometimes I'll want to double stamp just to kind of make it a little more intense if I need to, but look at those little berries fit perfectly on the end of that stem. So I'm just going to go through and fill this up with lots of the swipe stamping. Now here are the final results. I think I'm going to keep my card this horizontal look, but I actually ended up changing it later on. But I like to have the bigger piece to work with because I could always cut it down. Now I wanted to show you how I added this little dotted banner along with the stamped greeting. So I have the thank you image that's in the stamp set, and then this card kit also comes with this great stencil of these banners. And these banners fit with the greetings in the stamp set. This is such a great idea. You could ink over these stencils, you could mist over these stencils, so many things, but I'm just going to use it as a template. So I've laid my stamp down so I can plan where it's going to be. And I've got a stylus here. Any stylus will work. And I'm going to make little dots along the inside edge of that stencil. So I'm using the yellow butter bar ink. And I'm just touching the end of the stylus onto the ink pad and then touching it onto my paper. And I'm just following along the edges of this stencil. Now you'll notice I'm not doing even spacing. I'm not taking a whole lot of time or care to do this. I think it looks kind of better, kind of free-handed. So I'm just going along and doing this as fast as I can because my baby's going to wake up at any moment. So I'm just going to go through and you can see what the dots are looking like here. But this is something fun that you can do with your stencils. You can use them to create fun little doodle-looking shapes and dots on your card. I also used the stylus and the ink to create dots in the center of my flowers. And then this is the pool ink, and I'm going to put little dots at the end of my berries here. Now my stylus is super old. I don't even know where I got this one, but I will link to some newer styluses, and I think this is a great tool to have on hand. Lots of things you can do with it. So there you can see those little dots add something interesting to those simple stamps. So now I'm going to stamp my greeting here. I decided just to stamp this solid so that it stands out a little bit. So I didn't do the swipe stamping technique, but you could if you wanted to, and I just stamped that with the soft pool ink. Now I decided to cut my card down. As I told you, I change my mind every once in a while. So I just cut this to 4 1/4 by 4 1/4, and I'll add this to a card later. But I'm going to extend my stencil out. I'm just lining it up the top and the bottom of the stencil with what I already did the dots on the left so that I can have a little V on this end too, the little V cut, so the banner extends across the card. So actually my banner is a little bit longer than the stencil had intended. So that's just something you can do to get more out of your stencil also. I totally intended for this to be a 1-layer card that was horizontal, but I changed my mind as I went along because I saw this border stamp that's in that same stamp set. I thought it would be fun to use it, so I'm going to make this a vertical card, and I'm lazy, so when it comes to stamping at least, so I tend to only stamp what shows. So I'm only stamping some zigzags on the bottom and on the top because the center will be covered by the stamp piece that we already created. The fun thing about this border stamp is that you could kind of put a little space between it and get a completely different look than if you stamp them up close together. So there you can see the soft pool zigzag on the Hero Arts pool note card in the background. So there you have a fun swiping stamping technique, just another way to get more out of your stamps and inks. And I guess I should give a big thanks to that celebrity who inked their stamp wrong because it gave me a fun new technique idea. Now, if you have any questions, please head to my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com. And if you're interested in any of the supplies I use, they're listed below in the description here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next video.